Introduce the speaker today. So Trond Reinholdsten is a Norwegian composer and artist based in Oslo. He's a graduate at the Norwegian Academy, where he's also been associated as a researcher with Jennifer Torrance, the Institute for Post-Human Performance Practice, as well as his extensive work within and as the Norwegian opera, which we'll be talking about today. Much of his work is performative and multimedia and blends his work as a composer, filmmaker, visual artist, essayist, and vocalist. And he's been featured at numerous international music festivals. And I first encountered his work at the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival back in 2008 with 13 music theatre pieces and concert music piece, which are experiences that still resonate with me now. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say Trond is one of the most significant voices working in experimental music today. And it's a great pleasure to welcome him to the RNCM. Trond, over to you.
Thank you. Oh, you're so polite. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm normally a nervous person, and it is exaggerated even more in this Zoom reality that we spend quite a lot of time in now. I'm still not really used to it, but we know the format a little bit now, so it's just to go with the flow, I think. Yeah, I actually have a script, yeah, a pre-written script. So I hope it will not be too boring. It will not be too intellectual. I can promise that for sure. And of course, I will try to make a very spectacular multimedia show. So this always goes wrong. Yeah. You like multimedia in the UK? Good. Share screen. What's the best thing to do? I try to do the desktop, then it's more chaotic. So what do you see now? Do you see me? No. You see me? No.
We can see you and your slide as well.
You do that? Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Unfortunately, this is not my work, but it's multimedia. Okay, so the first line in the script is "Good evening, Manchester." So far, so good. And then it says, so we do this like this. So my name is Trond Reinholdsten. That doesn't say in the script, actually. That was improvised, but how do you know? But I'm a composer that at some point, quite a few years ago, decided that my practice involves all the art forms, that music is more than sound, that there are principally no restrictions to what types of material is allowed or relevant. This, at least for me, resulted in an embracement of an aesthetics of universal genie dilettantism. So in 2009, I established my own opera house called the Norwegian Opera. Oh, guten Abend, the Norwegian Opera. In my own living room in the slums of Oslo. Yeah, there are no slums in Oslo, but it's a part of Oslo. As the project was an attempt at a radical withdrawal from the standard production modes and working processes of traditional opera and contemporary music, and maybe also because I suffer from a bit of social anxiety and steadily increasing paranoia, I decided to not have any audience at my performances except for a few well-meaning insider friends. As a further radicalization of the project, the institution was in 2015 relocated far into the Swedish forests. This is the Opera House now. In this milieu of isolation and concentration, the famous opera series Ö was begun, and now without any audience whatsoever. Ö signifies the empty set, like in mathematics, the void, and therefore also the foundation of infinite possibilities. As of today, the series consists of 16 episodes. Number 17 is right around the corner. Yeah. The narrative is focused around 3, or is it maybe 4 protagonists that has barricaded themselves in a cellar in a total negation of the outside and of the system, performing experiments in art, political theory, and alchemy in preparation for the so-called event of absolutely world-changing proportions.
Trond, you're not sharing your audio through your PowerPoint.
I'm not sharing my audio. How do I do that?
Go into share screen.
Share first.
Share screen and the advanced options, advanced sharing options.
No.
Is that right?
You don't need the advanced options. You just tick the box in the bottom left that says share computer sound.
Yeah.
And then reshare your screen.
How is this going? But we should rather start with some dry intellectual, historical, musical, theatrical context. Here is the title of tonight's talk. Oi. Boom. What happened? Can you hear me? From where I sit, it seems like my computer crashed. No. Oh, there you are. That was fun. This is the title of today's talk. Am I sharing now? What about now? It's getting better and better. Okay, The possibly dead art form of music in light on the possible knowing element of music style in different practices is possible at a low point and more creative depression, a pattern in the white line of the poet the rest of the 21st century, but the lecture will also be about music in general and opera in particular. It's all possible genres of particular episode. We declare we're right or wrong in how my practice is right to piece and sometimes wrong in praxis, if we have time for the last thing. So if the invention and exploration of atonality, now comes the dry intellectual, historical, musical, theatrical context background. If the invention and exploration of atonality was perhaps the most important event in classical music history at the beginning of the 20th century, what in the second half of the century would be the crux, the point, maybe controversial, where things for some reason has to change its course and where nothing really can be the same again, where you either decide to take the consequences or have to suppress or even deny the whole problematic. This event is for me not John Cage. Well, maybe it is, it says in my script here, yeah, maybe it is. But another candidate would be Maurizio Kagel, which we mentioned in our earlier session with some of you. Maurizio Kagel, who of course only became Kagel after suffering a severe Cage shock when the American first visited Germany in the 50s. His too often quoted statement, which I actually quote whenever I can, which goes like this: you can use sound materials, you can compose with actors, with cups, tables, buses, and oboes, and finally compose film. Is the radical dematerialization of music. My favorite is the oboes. I try to picture all these cups and buses and tables, and the oboes are the most absurd component of this of this form of interdisciplinary art, I think. So as I see it, in Kagel's case, this dematerialization springs out not from some happy hippie kind of exploration and freedom, but in the form of a brutal institutional critique, a mocking of musical structuralism at the height of structuralism. His maybe paradigmatic piece, Sur scène, from 1956, which maybe hardly can be said to be a fantastic piece, who knows? But this consists of modernist sounding random music, a caricature of an opera singer doing some opera stuff, a music professor, something like this, babbling an overly academic but mostly nonsensical lecture, and a mime appearing as a reacting audience member. The medium of this piece is the concert situation and the institution of new music itself. The way to music theater goes through the perspective of the meta, through deconstruction. It is from its origin already a critique of music, its power structures and academicism. So, one of the most important inventions in musical modernism in the 50s was, of course, electronic music. And this coincided with an aesthetic of quasi-laboratory style scientific rationalism executed by serious men with white shirts and black ties. My favorite piece of electronic music from this era, or tape music as it was then often called, has to be the following Kagel classic with the telling title of Antithesis. How will this work? Oh. So this is Kagel's tape music quite different aesthetic than the guy we saw a photograph of just before. So for all the sometimes chaos in Kagel's work, the method is of the tradition of the score. Like in this sketch from Himmelsmechanik, a piece for all kinds of old-fashioned theater effects of a Baroque theater, which represents an almost serial way of organizing. So this is it's actually it's just a sketch from his pre-compositional work, but it's probably not so easy to see. But on the left side, it's like instruments in an orchestra. It says Regen, that's rain, Schnee, snow, Dampf, yeah, what's that in English? Moist, or whatever, fog, waterfalls, rainbows, wind, and all these are kind of effects that are part of this old Baroque theater, and he treats them like different voices in a musical ensemble or something like this. And when you look more about these numbers on the upper row, it's very serial-like way of organizing this. It's a number that designates the amount of density, dichte, how many elements are used at the same time. So it's first 3, and then it's 2, and then it's 1. And also, if you see the organization of these numbers, it's actually some kind of typically serialist manipulation of this these numbers, how they are permutated and so on. So this is, in a way, it's a super traditional way of composing. And I copied this from a book that came a few years ago called Composed Theater. And this is kind of a typical example of how to work in the theater field as a composer with a very specific compositional thinking. I hope I didn't say what is coming in the text now. Let's see. I accept as my duty here to attempt to sketch a specific tradition, or even maybe a specific aesthetic of theatrical transdisciplinary works that is formed by the composer's brain rather than coming from the tradition of theater or visual art. Is it something in our times when the democratization of technology means that whoever can easily produce a film, put together sounds, design graphic material, and do whatever else in every combination of art genres on their laptop? Is there then something specific that characterizes a compositional thinking? The core for me is not that there is more emphasis on sound or sometimes even singing. It has more to do with the abstraction involved in musical notation. But don't be afraid. I will not participate in the deconstruction of the so-called magic of the concert experience, the intense Aufführung, the leibliche Kopräsenz between musician and audience, because this is a real thing. This was German quotations from Erika Fischer-Lichte that I will come to in a short time. But the real creation in music, the production of musical ideas, happens somewhere else. You can claim, maybe. Traditionally, with dry calculations on a piece of paper, safely removed from the social panic of the theater company or the anxiety of the festival producers, formulated in an esoteric code, the score. Composition in music of the Western world, and also maybe in music of other Himmelsrichtungen, is therefore in its essence a highly conceptual activity. Yes, it is pure Platonism. That's what it says here. The truth of music, the idea, the good, beauty, the very ontological level is the paper, the plan, the mathematicized structure, and the acoustical appearance in the phenomenal world is but an authentic copy. Yeah, okay, this slightly overplayed description of the composer's fetish for strict planning in the score is, in my view, what distinguishes a composer's approach to theater from other kinds of performative art. Matthias Rebstock and David Rösner have suggested the term composed theater in the already mentioned book, which is titled Composed Theater, which is characterized exactly by its scoring, or more exact, the working process that has resulted out of the score tradition. The influential writings of Theaterwissenschaftlerin Erika Fischer-Lichte on a specific understanding of the term performance, which has been very influential in theatrical discussions since its publication in 2004, seems to be in total opposition to this. She rather celebrated the intensified das Ereignis, the event, or the thing that happens, the point where an artistic act is not so much a work, but transforms into reality, where it has performative consequences. The art performs, it becomes concrete life, it changes reality, as in the opening example from her book, The Aesthetic of the Performative. I think maybe that's the English title, Die Ästhetik des Performativen, where in a Marina Abramovic performance, the audience has to intervene to save the artist from her. It is tempting to suggest that modern music theater in general, if such a thing is possible to generalize, is characterized exactly by the opposite. I here offer two short specimens from recent activity in the music field as counterpoints to Fischer-Lichte's proposed aesthetic. What comes now? Philadelphia. Jesse Marino. Maybe you will agree with me that the aesthetic here is rather that of discipline and the strict separation of work and life, actor and audience, than what Fischer-Lichte maybe wanted to celebrate. John Cage, who of course is the great prophet of composed theater, even defined his theatrical pieces and actually also his music in general as disciplined actions. And this tradition certainly lives on, as should be evident from these examples. An established genre formula today is the contemporary music ensemble doing complex patterns of movements and sound in quasi-unison in an aesthetic reminiscent of the assembly line choreography of the workers of the car factories in the production methods of Henry Ford. Okay, that was my interpretation, but maybe you agree that is some kind of discipline involved here. Jennifer Walsh has suggested the term new discipline as a way to capture the more or less recent strong tendencies for a compositional multimedial practice. English is a very hard language. How can you do this every day? The label has several layers of meaning, where of course discipline, as in cross-discipline, is the most obvious. For me, the discipline of the disciplined actions that I feel I see everywhere in music, and this is of course strongly connected with the standard way of performing classical music, was something that I wanted to challenge. Kagel, to return to this hero, once said that his ideal of a performer was that of Buster Keaton, who with his famous stone face went through whatever absurd actions and situations without the slightest hint of psychological investment. Although the following classic of passive-aggressive feminist performance art shares some basic similarity with the Buster Keaton style, it is also an important reference how to stretch this approach into something more uncanny. No, uncanny, is that English word? Unheimlich. Martha Rosler's Semiotics of the Kitchen from 1975. Oh, it's a What is this? Get Grammarly.
Opener. Pen. Quart bottle. Rolling pin. Spoon. Tenderizer. You.
So this was also very much my background and maybe my introduction to music theater. Martha Rosler is from the visual art field, and also this this style of performance maybe has some connections to the contemporary musician doing some kind of theatrical actions. But what really influenced my work, and I feel I'm not super original here, was my visits to the famous Berliner Volksbühne as an audience member in the early 00s. I was still a student then, probably, but the wild energy of the actors and amount of perceived chaos in the works of Frank Castorf, Christoph Schlingensief, and their mad combo of actor-performers went far beyond any kind of artistic expression I had experienced in contemporary music. When starting to appear in person in my own pieces, which I did from around 2002, I wanted to break with this stone face aesthetic and instead overplay some kind of desperate, hysteric, anxious author, which after all is much closer to the truth of my own psychological reality. Maybe. I don't know. In my debut as performing composer, I was at one point in the piece just repeatedly shouting, "Now we need to get out of music!" as a cheap manifesto-like program note included as a performance inside the piece itself. My main project since 2009 was the activities of the Norwegian Opera, my opera house, which I will come to shortly. But in 2016, I made a piece that revisited the concert situation in all its bureaucratic pragmatism. It was a piano concerto called Theory of the Subject. And while the role of the orchestra was purely conventional, they played the notes in the score. I mean, what else can you do with 2 rehearsals and the normal production system of the orchestra institution? I could only just kind of warn them that it will happen a lot around you, but just play your notes and then don't pay attention to the rest, basically. That was my strategy. The part of the pianist, on the other hand, far exceeds that of a normal classical music virtuoso. But the Buster Keaton ideal certainly is the starting point. The first we hear of piano playing is performed by a self-playing kind of robot piano. That's how I think about it. It's kind of a machine symbolizing some kind of a post-human reality, maybe, although it's an old invention now. The human pianist, meanwhile, is seen via live video from the green room reading French philosophy. And in the kind of secure space of the green room, I think 30 minutes, she actually appears on stage. And that was that, and then she leaves again the stage and back in the green room. I try to talk on top of this. Then it starts kind of an imaginary flashback, or it's not totally imaginary actually. It's kind of a documentation of a project where this soloist played 4 hours through, let's say, the monistic canon. I think. On a very public place in Oslo. It's a kind of dark mausoleum of this fantastic old art. And after a while, she walks out of this concert house. Here she enters the famous location of the Norwegian opera, my opera house. And then she kind of becomes part of this strange sect or group. That's, how is this? She becomes part of this, and at some point, oh no, multimedia show. She joins this group and goes to an island, kind of utopian island, where they up the utopian commune. Yeah. Okay. And she even decides to shave off her beard. And she then comes back into the. I guess it's, yeah. I'm actually not going to show that, but now I'm lost in the YouTube timeline here. Let's see. So she actually comes back after a while, and then she has kind of renewed power. She has become a kind of activist somehow. But then in the kind of coda of this, this is kind of the cadenza of the piece. It's very traditional, neoclassical. So she ends up here. in the end, she decides to sacrifice her career as a virtuoso soloist and cut off her finger. So this was a kind of return to the concert hall, but sort of my most of my energy went into the opera house project, and I asked myself, what is the ultimate contrast to the contemporary music form of disciplined music theater that I try to give some hints about? And also we could add to Erika Fischer-Lichte's Ästhetik des Performativen. And the answer is, of course, opera. Opera. As I already mentioned, in 2009, I founded my own opera house, the Norwegian Opera, with the inaugural motto, Das Geburt des Oper durch die Krise der zeitgenössische Musik. It was situated in my living room. It's a private Bayreuth, downscale to the white trash reality of a noisy apartment in the slums of Oslo. It's repeated here, the slums of Oslo. It's very important for me that it's the slums of Oslo, owned by a half-depressed artist in the soon-to-perish genre of so-called new music. The aim was, through a radical downscaling of the opera apparatus, to reclaim nothing less than artistic freedom at its purest, which is fundamentally lost in the repressive, bureaucratic, overly academic, sneak commercialized and conservative elitism of the contemporary music scene. I was myself the dictatorial opera director, the composer of all works, as well as the librettist, the director, heldentenor, scenographer, propaganda minister, web designer, ticket master, cleaning assistant, conceptual consultant, head of the workers' union, restaurant chef, etc. The aim of the institution that was formed after something like 10 years of compositional activity, inspired by the institutional critique of the 60s and directed toward this deconstruction of contemporary music, was to, this is a very long sentence, but we are in the middle of it now, and it continues like this. Blah, 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 was to construct a utopian space to gain total artistic freedom, where all outer distractions, institutional irritations, sources of critique, and aesthetic counter-arguments, in short, other people, are cancelled out. There were no responsibilities in terms of length of the work, quality, amount of boredom, urge to entertain musicians or singers, or that the art should function in any kind of minimal way. I started off on a zero budget, so money and production balance was also not a factor. I also drastically reduced the audience to further increase the semi-incestuous centripetal gravity. Yes. The Norwegian Opera has produced, among other things, the spectacular masterworks Orpheus, where the relation between the dead art form opera and the vital new genre opera, without the E, is explained. And then there is the Apocalypse, a setting of the downfall of capitalism in the grand last days of judgment, which opens the way for the new pure true communism in the new Art Jerusalem. Utopia, about possibilities for an island of freedom and beauty in today's shitty neoliberalist Facebook shares destruction system reality. And the final production, Narcissus, where the protagonist, as a metaphor for the Norwegian opera itself, in the end drowns in a pool of self-centeredness and egotism. The Norwegian opera kick-started its artistic venture through the theoretical seminar, The Return of the Grand Narratives, which re-established contemporary music's link to the big subjects so long lost to an art form that today is mostly is mostly occupied with delicate effects of timbre, subtleties of instrumentation, yet further minute explorations of extended playing techniques, or, like myself, masochistic artistic self-mutilation in an introvert perverse ritual of shame. Wasn't music once the highest art form, the most able to deal with truth itself? Or so Schopenhauer said something like this in the good old times. What was needed instead was an affirmative action, a gesture of love and fidelity. The Norwegian Opera, its opera house, was strategically positioned in close proximity to the other opera house in Oslo, the Norwegian Opera and Ballet, opened in 2008 with a yearly budget of 70 million euro and an average of half a premiere of a newly composed opera per year. And the slick modern tourist magnet architecture was clearly visible from the toilet window of my opera house. This environment was no longer adequate for an opera house with the highest artistic ambitions. The Norwegian Opera had grown out of its neighborhood and was ready for the next level. So in 2015, the Norwegian Opera bought a new opera house, namely a villa deep into the woods of Sweden. Only in total isolation from the system was it possible to further follow the true path, like the early Christians who, after a period of martyrdom in confrontation with the Roman Empire, went into the desert to seek concentration and the study of truth. From this epicenter, now without any audience, and in a building that is gradually transformed into a big operatic scenography, a potential infinite series of episodes in one grand continued narrative has been launched. The title of the series is Ö. Yeah, it begins like this. Episode 1 starts in the void, in a position of radical emptiness. The situation is that of exhaustion and depression and pure impossibility of activity. But after what seems to be years, some abstract potential is giving intensity and is incarnated into a substance uttering the word Ö, which of course is the mathematical sign for the empty set. In episode 2, we again encounter the spring being clears the world, all old nature to restructure the coordinates of its world. That was the restructuring of the coordinates of its world. In this new environment of pure mud, or ursuppe, prima materia, this being slowly begins consciousness enhancing meditation and breathing exercises. Music is invented. That was the invention of music. Episode 3 is best known for the aria I Want to Sleep. Which gradually leads into the magic Verwandlungsszene, where the force of mud is transformed into the magical tower of truth of unknown abilities. Powerful, which again leads to the famous birth scene. Three new creatures are born. And in episode 4, we follow their development towards the invention of the experience of the we, and the notion of existence. It is a world of pre-civilizational happiness and wholeness with no sense or concept of an outside. They begin formulating aesthetic hypotheses on quantity and quality.
Qualität oder Quantität und was ist schlecht und was ist
One of the
schlecht.
characters to develop a kind of revolutionary theories and discovers that the force of wisdom rises to tension in the room. It's a blue balloon. And the umbilical cord, which leads into a wide tube, which in episode 5 will be transformed into an experimental studies in new art and new political strategies for the world. When we reach episode 6, the social structure and intellectual development has reached a new level. The theories of the French utopian socialist Charles Fourier is energetically discussed.
So bleibt die Einheit Gottes im Inneren Hauptquelle der allgemeinen Harmonie, der allgemeinen Harmonie, die Anziehungskraft ist die Anziehungskraft.
Of course, you know this from before, but Charles Fourier's theories of freedom, of the society of harmony, of the connection between the organizing of social justice with the flow of passions, attractions, and enjoyments. And these protagonists study this and finds resonance with this, and they form a kind of commune to live in the spirit of Fourier. The notion of universal the harmonic orgy, where artistic, sexual, and gastronomic pleasures are enjoyed to the full as a training for universal equality and happiness. The character with the yellow head, though, gets some doubts and claims what we need is a cut
What we need is a
in the
cut
stream
in the
of
stream
becomings and
of
appearances.
comings and
A
appearances.
very bold statement, and proposes a more antagonistic strategy towards the soon-to-be future of a renewed true communism for the whole of humankind. This is the main conflict contradiction of episode 6 and 7, which eventually leads to Yellowhead's growing fantasies about the execution of some mysterious, redeeming, world-changing act, executed with utmost discipline in episode 7. The ideas
Manifestation framtrer
episode in terms of artistic quality. How could it come to this? Episode 8, at least, it's song about the fish with the text from the Blessed Fathers concerning the demon state in the
So like a fish going towards the sea, we must hurry to reach ourselves.
Episode 9 officially establishes so-called the world consolidation space. Unfortunately, the red geist is the idea.
I am the idea.
But what
I am the idea.
What happens now? Hold! Something is certainly happening. The ceiling. What was perceived as a totally self-contained world is having a crack in the ceiling. It is at this moment of confusion, also doubt and decadence, that we find the protagonist at the beginning of episode 13. Too complicated to explain. The opera series is a mixture of dystopian science fiction, verismo, communist propaganda, outdated existentialism, and plump autobiography. In other words, a little like Der Ring des Nibelungen, but mine will be much longer, of course. The working method of the Norwegian opera aims to radically reduce the distance from artistic idea to realization. in stark contrast to the professional collaborative process of a traditional opera premiere that not only involves the famously slow work of notating a complex score, a chain of compromises between the different specialists in each art field, not only between the director and conductor, but now also more and more often include a series of pitching, where small parts of the unfinished work is tested in front of a core of consultants or sponsors even, who then give the yes or the no to further development of the project in a parody of democratic artistic process or a monstrous celebration of artistic fear. That was polemical. Whatever concept the opera director of the Norwegian Opera has, it will flow frictionless through the production system. It is the Marxian dream come true, total control over the means of production. The distribution of creative energy can thus be heavily weighted towards conceptual work, research, preparation, and the pre-recording of the full opera, which is normally performed as playback, before an intense period of construction and execution, often involving several people building sets, masks, costumes, and props. The Norwegian Opera does not have rehearsals. The energy, clumsiness, and banality of this theatrical aesthetic, always on the brink of disaster and chaos, are preferred to any qualitatively secured performance by the experts of a trade. The Norwegian Opera is a system of inbreeding and mutation, where pure amateurism is a necessary ingredient. As some of you would know, maybe all of you know this already, a group of philosophers, artists, and other intellectuals set forth a project in the late 16th century in Firenze to reawaken the ancient form of the Greek drama, the ultimate Gesamtkunstwerk, in its combining of myth, music, and ritual. A spectacular misunderstanding of what this theatrical language was and how it was performed was exactly what resulted in the novelty of the opera art form, like in the first operatic masterpiece Orfeo by Claudio Monteverdi in 1607. What we need today, 400 years later, is a profound misunderstanding of opera itself, a ridiculous, naive, and catastrophically failed attempt to awaken opera from its zombie existence. I was polemical again. It cannot be done in a change of mere content, either on the level of story or on the level of musical inventions and new sounds. It can only be done in a radical restructuring of the very coordinates of the genre. What is the essence that should survive? The attempt, in my view, trying to be humble now, in my view, the attempt to formulate art on the most monumental level, an end to all ends, an opening to risk, to chance, to commitment, to pathos. In our time, where the great constructions of modernity are said to be outdated, when we live in the multiple, okay, I always start to laugh when this is just a quotation. I just try to fake it, that it was my own. Okay, it's a little intellectual here. In our time, where the great constructions of modernity are said to be outdated, when we live in the multiple, it's a philosophical term, when there are no great epics of history or of thought, when there is an irreducible plurality of registers and languages in thought as in action, registers so diverse and heterogeneous that no idea can totalize or reconcile them. The only position for a new narrative is the position of the empty set, the void, the total subtraction from the status quo and absolute isolation from the system. But the empty set as we know from mathematics, can still be used in operations. It can be generative. It was nothing. It can be all. In the latest project of the Norwegian Opera at the Münchner, it's not the latest, but a project at the Münchner Biennale für Neues Musiktheater in 2018, the audience enters a cinema with a countdown to a supposedly live streaming from the Opera House in Sweden, in the style of the now common streamings from our nice colleagues at the Metropolitan Opera and others. After this, and Covent Garden also does this, I think. After this 1 hour-long film, which also included some theatrical interventions, a curtain were opened where the opera crew of 6 members were seated. After some highbrow hermeneutical analysis of what the audience had just experienced and a rough presentation of the institution, the Norwegian Opera, and some more fuss and chaos, a tunnel was relieved. The audience was invited to step over this threshold, we can maybe imagine, from fiction into reality, and enter a dark claustrophobic space, maybe a sort of favela or romanticized Roma camp. The ground filled with soil, a pool of fishes, several huts built of trash, strange smells, old food all around, and 6 singing women in bizarre masks and costumes with East European sounding names. These are the followers of Ö. The followers of Ö, a group, maybe a kind of sect, or maybe a party of members from the proletariat that has gathered to watch the filmed episodes of Ö and put this theory from the films into political practice in the world. It is a kind of ideal audience that without any doubt totally understands the message of Ö and thereby gets ready to transform the world. This opens up a new narrative line in the Ö universe. By the 3 protagonists we met in episode 13, we didn't meet it. We skipped the episode 13. But the 3 protagonists you saw, they are trapped. They are trapped inside the film medium and continue discussing and experimenting in philosophy, art, and alchemy. The followers, on the other hand, are able to interpret the ganze Suppe and embark on the revolution itself while singing their hymn. This is not singing.
Fiala fola fola, fianna fiarra fiocco cacacurra la saca, spalla uraja.
Constituting their community, they together watch the episode 15. This is inside this theatrical production or this performance, theatrical performance. These followers that you just heard singing, together with the audience, watched episode 15, which is the dramatic high point and the oi oi oi. Ooh. The dramatic high point in the film is when the green mother of all 3, she or it is also called Ymir and Erda and Herzeleide. She rises from the dead. She died because she died giving birth to them in episode 4, I mean, as you know. To tell the secret meaning of the title Ö. This hardcore philosophical excerpt, which I fear will be too intellectual for the people of Manchester, will end this talk and wrap up the lecture in a schmackvolles, full of taste, circular ABA form. Multimedia.
This subtractive point of the mathematicians searched for a sign far from all their customary alphabets. Neither a Greek, nor a Latin, nor a Gothic letter, but an old Scandinavian letter. Emblem of the void. Zero affected by the barring of sense, as if they were dully aware that in proclaiming that the void alone is, because it alone exists from the system, they were touching upon some sacred religion, itself liminal to language, as if thus rivaling the theologians for whose supreme being has been the proper name since long ago. The mathematicians has had to shelter their own audacity behind the character of a forgotten language.
Thank you for the attention. That was a little more than 1 hour, unfortunately, but thank you for still being here.
Larry, are you going to, sorry, I think Larry's waiting for me. Thank you so much for your presentation and for your thoughtfulness and in some ways challenging and very fascinating presentation and an insight into your works. I had no idea about the opera that your institution that you've created and how you're challenging really interesting things. I've asked if Larry would be happy to field the questions, and I'm going to pass over to him now. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Barbara. Trond, thank you for a wonderful talk. We have a question straight in from Devon. Devon, over to you.
Hi, Trond. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was really interesting. I was also in the research seminar this afternoon, and it was equally nice to hear. It might have been because I couldn't quite hear you over the sound of the music playing, but I just had a couple of questions kind of relating to power structures in French philosophy, I guess. So like my own research itself is quite influenced by French post-structuralism with specific reference to Deleuze. And it seems like you kind of take a lot on from that kind of French continental perspective. So I was wondering if you could maybe give some more description about how these conceptions of power within this kind of post-structuralist framework functions in your music, maybe like specifically referencing people like Michel Foucault and Simone de Beauvoir and kind of that trajectory, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for a hard question. It's always when you ask when you're asked about philosophy as a composer, I get nervous. That said, I sometimes use very clear have very clear references. I mean, it's kind of almost all the time kind of hidden and not spoken out. But when I when I put together the text, it's actually a lot of quotations, directly just cut out from also from philosophy. And you're mentioning Deleuze, and never used him, but I used or I misused a lot his one of his well, friendly enemies, or one of his people that criticized him or wanted to really discuss further, which is Alain Badiou, still living French philosopher, and in a way he tries, the way I understand it, he tries to kind of overcome this post-structuralist, also postmodern situation. And he is kind of provocatively again speaks about truth, and in his very own use of this word, and so he's kind of a figure that wants to bring I don't know. For me, it's kind of operatic character. He tries to bring back the largeness of also of philosophy. He happens to be a fan of Wagner as well, and he has some kind of grandeur to his language that I use. Actually, the last thing you heard was a direct quotation from him. Where he speaks about this void, using it as kind of a figure, or maybe you can call it a metaphor for how a revolution can come into place. It's some kind of empty void inside a situation in society, for example, that suddenly can be turned, it can kind of be subtracted, as he says, and this can be the very core of some uprising or something like this. But I misuse it. I mean, the piano concerto, I don't know if you saw it, the Badiou book also, Theory of the Subject. It's the title of the piano concerto is stolen from this book, but I mean, there is really misused. I use some of its concepts, but then I use it wrongly a little bit because he has a different idea of subject, for example. But in a way, the pianist goes through a kind of subjectivization process during the 70 minutes of the concerto. But the way he talks about subjectivization is a little bit different. But I am misusing, as I said. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure he'd be happy with people misusing his philosophy. He misuses everyone's philosophy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Devin. We've got a question from Dave Bainbridge in the room as well. And I should remind anyone watching on YouTube, you can put questions in the chat there, and I'm keeping an eye on it. David.
Thanks, Trond. That was so interesting and such good fun to watch. I have two questions, one of them serious and the other very stupid, and it'll be very brief. So the first one follows on from Devin's question to a certain extent, but it's particularly about Badiou and the void and its relation to the situation. So I wondered if there was a sense in which, like, moving out into the woods, there was kind of this gesture of moving towards the empty place, subtracting yourself from the situation of contemporary opera. But one thing that's essential in Badiou is that the void is present within the situation, but it can't count it. And so there's a sense that you can't move towards it as if to evade. And so revolution is imminent to the situation as its possibility. And so I wondered to what extent, because this was really pleasantly ambiguous in the way that you kind of bridge the gap back to opera. I wondered to what extent you feel that you're acting within contemporary opera with the E, or against it without the E. So that's the first question, but the second, very quickly, was just, I wondered whether there was any conscious reference in the kind of characters of U to the film Troll 2. Just they looked kind of like them. I don't know if you've seen it. But
I didn't. Yeah. Troll, as in Trolls, yeah.
Yeah, it's magnificently awful, but you should certainly watch it.
Yeah, no, actually not, but others have said it they think about Trolls when they see it. So, yeah, and for your, that was the serious question, and the stupid question about you and this. Yeah, again, this is a. I also know this that that kind of void is part of the situation itself. It's kind of a, and I decided to go out, but then I only use it as a kind of starting point or a way to start fantasizing in a way. Of course, I don't have any intention of doing a correct Badiou or anyone else to present the theories in a correct way. And this idea of this going out in the forest, it will, from the work that's ahead of me now, it will actually be still developed, and it's even more. I go into this. I don't know if you know this phenomenon of preppers. Preppers. It started in the US. I think it was a kind of maybe far right even movement. People that went out somewhere to prep, to be prepared for. I mean, maybe some imagined civil war or the. Now with the Black Lives Matter, it's I've seen it come up there. It's kind of, they imagine it's this kind of ultimate fight in the US or something like this. So they go out and build a shelter. Of course, they store their toilet paper and weapons probably, and so they are preppers. And actually, it's also a leftist side of this, which I happen to meet a lot in Sweden. The kind of people that want to have a 100% self-sustained home, where they filter rainwater and blah, blah, and they want to grow their own food. Also some kind of apocalyptic sense that it's you can't trust society anymore. So I will try to play into this idea, this kind of more darker political direction. So it's not an answer to your question, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, the most I can just say that I'm misused Badiou again.
Just to be clear, I wasn't trying to charge you with that in any sense. It just, I don't know, the seclusion and the attempt at subtraction just seemed interesting on that basis.
Conceptually, it is. I mean, because it takes its starting point in the genre of opera, but then kind of claiming that I do something that totally subtracts from this system of opera, changing the letters and so in a way it's I also kind of operate in the situation itself somehow conceptually, maybe.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We don't have questions from YouTube yet, but we have a whole raft of really lovely comments, including people that have stumbled across this unexpectedly and have been really delighted by it. But I believe we may have a question from Adam Swain. Adam, or maybe not.
No, hello. Hello, Trond.
Hello.
I hesitate to ask a question. I have so many questions. I have a lot of questions. First of all, which Fraggle are you? Are you in one of those costumes?
Yeah, normally, yes. Yes. But we change, we change the colors and yeah, it's not really character building like in Royal Shakespeare Company, and this, it's more, you just put it on and do some gestures.
Excellent. Okay, so this is good because this is what I wanted to ask. I mean, since you're the composer and also the performer, and since you've basically got rid of the audience by taking out that marvelous performance space and filming all your pieces, I just wonder what your approach to collaboration with other people is in your music.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit in the session earlier today, and this is a kind of problem for me. Maybe it's a psychological problem, or maybe it's also a bit typical for quite a few composers that you want a little bit to be this demiurge, this all creating omnipotent God a little bit. You want this control, and I am also share this tendency. So I mean, in some sense, it's really traditional composing, I feel, in the process, because I plan everything. Not everything is scored, obviously, but it's pre-produced, the sound, and I make sketches and blah blah, and for the costumes and the scenography, and I also always make just kind of an audio file with instructions, kind of regie directing instructions. So when we record it, everyone hears instructions all the time, so we don't need to rehearse. But in a way, this is also kind of score, or the idea of a score, that I just put all the instructions in the mixing program or something. So it's really composed beforehand. But then we gather what is kind of become a kind of crew for me. It's people that I worked with for more than 10 years now. And they are really into the project, and they really understand everything. So it's easy to give them a lot of freedom inside this quite strict planned system, where they have the instructions on their ear, but still they can do whatever. I never say yes or no to what they do. Apart from this, and they often make their own costumes out of my initial ideas and these kind of things. But we talked a little about earlier, as I always have a dream to kind of open it up a little bit, to kind of share more the conceptual working and discuss the themes and blah blah. But it's hard for me. Yeah.
Great, thanks. I enjoyed that answer, and I enjoyed the talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We do have a question on YouTube, but first we have a question from Jeff in the room, then YouTube, then Michelle.
Good kveld, og hilse from Manchester.
Hey. Okay.
Fascinating talk, and I really enjoyed your enthusiasm in the way you put it over. You mentioned Bayreuth at one point, and I'm sure that many of us in the room were thinking this is a kind of quasi-Bayreuth. The idea of creating your own opera where you're in total control of it. But sort of following on from that, the Bayreuth principle, the opera house in the forest where you're away from conventional society, conventional audiences, this talk of a neo-Marxist utopian future. Even at one point, I think you referred to Cage the Prophet. It's all very 19th century language, isn't it? And I just wonder, are you really just an old-fashioned 19th century romantic artist?
Yeah, maybe. That would be nice, yeah? No, well, I think it's some kind of exaggeration going on a little bit in my work. Of course, the references to Wagner is very obvious, but maybe it's also some kind of, I don't know, sadness involved, because we live in a, obviously I don't have a mad King Ludwig II to support, and I don't have a German state that want to build a kind of new country out of this, a little bit based on this these artworks. I mean, contemporary music today is some kind of just a lost the total the connection with the public sphere in a way. So I'm kind of trying to overplay this a little bit, I think, to kind of insist on this. Okay, I make grand operas about the situation and kind of the maybe the fantasy of a revolution even, or total change of society. But it's happening somewhere in the woods. So it's so we don't really know if this is a big success.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
We have a question from a distinguished alumni, Michael Brayley, on YouTube, who says, Trond, have you thought about how or if could work in a live setting, functional live setting, i.e. with an audience? What would that look like?
Yeah. Actually, it's not really true that we didn't do this. We made kind of, what should I say, kind of theatrical screenings somehow. I think I mentioned it was very chaotic. I'm sorry in my talk, but I mentioned a quite big project in Munich in the festival there for music theater 2 years ago. And there, in a way, it started in a cinema situation. We made a kind of cinema with the kind of Hollywood style loud music, and so it's with popcorn and this kind of things. But then gradually it opened up, and it actually became a very theatrical situation. And then this now I kind of added this meta level, let's say, of these followers of Earth, and this. They appear in the real world, which is the theater. Maybe they could. So we're doing project now next year if it's not a virus going on. But the plan is to kind of that these followers of Earth are doing productions on their bigger world tour, world-changing event tour. Or yeah. Yeah, and also made kind of different versions of cinematic settings, or things that starts with a kind of cinematic setting and develops in more performative direction. Also kind of using sometimes the opera crew as a kind of characters that we are there and run the cinema somehow, and then blah, blah, things develop. Yeah.
Thank you, Trond. And I've been asked to mention that you shouldn't be putting your questions on YouTube. Apparently, they should be sent to research@rncm.ac.uk. So I have been rightly reprimanded for suggesting otherwise. But now we have a question in the room from Michelle Phillips.
Hi, Trond. Thank you. It's utterly compelling and really interesting, and by no means my area of expertise, but I really enjoyed that. I just wondered. I'm at home, as we all are these days, and my children are here. They're 4 and 6, and they loved that. I mean, it's I spend a lot of time in this little room. Hey, I just attached all my wires and I took the computer downstairs to watch your talk and watched it with them, and they just loved it. I mean, and I think they didn't just love it because it was some very imaginative visual elements, but they loved it because it's quite engaging and compelling, and it's quite it's very new. And I just wondered, is that anything intentional, that you intend to broaden your audience, not specifically for children, but perhaps including children, because what you're doing is something that appeals in lots of ways that other perhaps new artworks don't?
Yeah, thank you. That was very nice to hear. Amazing, actually. Well, I never worked kind of to promote my things in any way, I would say. So I never really tried to push it on in situations with children or something like this. But a few others have said a little what you say. And I mean, of course, it's some kind of extremely childish element to what I do. I like this naivete somehow, and just the joy of colors, the joy of throwing spaghetti around. This. For me, this is connected with traditional opera in a way. I like this just kind of the fetish of the material, or the fetish of the high note, and and these kind of things. And it's not very intellectual in some levels. Although it's talked about Badiou and these things, but on a different level, it's supposed to be like a child could have made it in a way. Yeah.
Michelle, thank you for your question. And I think this seems like a really good place to wind down, unless anyone else has any questions in the room. But Trond, thank you so much for an extraordinary talk, for sharing some amazing work. And I implore everyone in the room to go and watch the 10, 11 hours of in its full glory. It's emphatically worth it. And yes, thank you so much for coming. I think Barbara's got a few things to say about the next week, but for now, please give everyone a real, virtual, or both round of applause to the wonderful Trond Reinholdsten. There you go.
You have to make this sound now.
Double applause.
Just to say again, thank you so much. And you managed to perform in such an important way, actually, and communicate through that way some really important ideas and challenges when we think about opera and our musical art. So thanks very much for doing that. We're used to, especially when you set things up saying I'm going to be reading from a script, that really was a fantastic performance in how you delivered it. So thanks again. I want to say that we're staying with composition next week, and we're going to be welcoming Hilda Paredes. She's going to be talking about Harriet addressing political and social issues in musical composition. So that's great that she's able to join us, and hopefully we'll get lots of people taking part on Zoom and also on YouTube. So thanks again, and thanks to Larry for being our host today. So see you all